there's this concept of anthropology, and part of what I've been doing here is with these layouts is like I've been finding these like points of reference in history and kind of trying to make sense of life and how life progresses. And it's like history has progressed in these different ways where there's this idea of participant observation, and there's also this idea of from Robert Rodriguez of spy kids. And there's a relationship between the idea of anthropological participant observation and the idea of being a spy or espionage. And usually, like, the idea of a spy or a detective is filled with like creepy vibes and danger and all this stuff. Participant observation is more of a neutral kind of like thing where you're not trying to go and like make a bunch of like crazy things happen with participant observation. You're trying to kind of observe and participate within a culture. But when the culture turns out to actually be the jungle, the information jungle of the world, then it kind of crosses over with this idea of being a spy or espionage or a detective, just in trying to make sense of kind of like yourself and other people. And kind of like, and then this gets into this idea of judgment and decision making. Point of reference, I have a book I've included in layouts from like the summer, Psychology of Judgment and Decision Making. And of course there are a number of books on these topics, but that book and others get into this topic, into a number of topics of how do people make decisions, and not just decisions, which is a word I've thrown around a lot lately, decision conflict, decision overload, how to make decisions, but it ties back into this idea of judgment, ultimately. And there are a number of different types of judgment, including like people will make a logical judgment or an evaluation in the context of just saying, even when I say this ties back to this, that's like a sort of a judgment, or it's a logical inference. But there's the whole idea of judgment also comes down to establishing truth and falsehood and deciding people's fate on some level. And this ties back into these sort of archetypal situations, which include the whole concept of the Grand Inquisitor, and as the summary for that, in this book I have, the version of the Grand Inquisitor I have from back in 2002 from my stepdad, it's like there's a relationship between the idea of the Grand Inquisitor and Pontius Pilate in the story of the crucifixion. And there certainly are parallels between the idea of Inquisition and the whole crucifixion concept with Jesus. And there are questions of what's the relationship between those two sort of stories, and they're different, but they both have to do with judgment, and where somebody, or a single figure, whether it's the Grand Inquisitor or Pontius Pilate, is making a decision about the fate of something in the context of the world, of their worldview and their actual situation. And with Pontius Pilate, there's more of like a situation of a specific kind of practical problem, of sort of a practical issue of how to deal with a crowd outside and like one person and all these different things. Whereas with the Grand Inquisitor, it's more of this overall thing where the Grand Inquisitor is judging based on worldview and based on kind of almost running the world kind of thing, where in Pilate's case, this wasn't like the king establishing the fate of somebody. This was essentially a servant, a civil servant of some kind of doing his job in the context of, or trying to do his job in the context of everything. But the job of the Grand Inquisitor is more of a thing where the Grand Inquisitor is actually kind of in charge of the whole world. And this gets into the role played by a number of individuals in terms of religions, where you have, or even the concept of a warlord in different locations, where you essentially have one person who is, in essence, kind of playing the role of God to other people, and potentially deciding the fate of other people, and cutting out anyone who is going to threaten their worldview. And this was not the case with Pilate, where he asked Jesus, "What is truth?" And for him, it was like his I mean, at some level, it's like it's like the situation was the truth. Whereas in other cases, it's like the truth is actually something that can be established or determined in part by the range of choices an individual person has, or a number of individual people have, which gets into this whole concept of global game theory, where it's like there's a point in history now where there's a level of uncertainty and information exchange where each person has a range of kind of choices they can make. And a key aspect of that is just the information overload. How do you dig through the information jungle and the decision jungle? And on some level, this can become just completely overwhelming, especially for like a freelancer or somebody who doesn't have like a steady state kind of job situation going on, or even if one does, but it's like you're looking for something more. There's this big information decision jungle out there, and it's this thing called my dad calls social reality. So I'll leave it at that. I need to charge the camera and we'll see what we got here.